So let's get started properly. So in the last couple of years, we've seen AI tools like ChatGPT go mainstream. These are powerful and complex tools which have huge implications for the way we produce and consume information. Of course, a healthy democracy depends on access to good quality and reliable information. So what does the rise of generative AI mean for democracy? That's what we're here to discuss for today. And of course, as we know, 2024 is going to be a big year for elections, including probably here in the UK. So I think it's safe to say it's going to be a very interesting year for democracy and trust in politics and electoral integrity, which is why we're joined by three experts today who are going to bring some very different perspectives on things. So it should be in for a very rich discussion. We have Kyle Taylor, who is the author of a really great sort of easy read introductory guide to this whole area. Hannah O'Rourke, the co-founder of Campaign Lab, who do a lot of work supporting campaigners to harness technologies in useful, productive, positive ways. And finally, Azura Moore's Policy and Parliamentary Relations Manager at Full Fact, the fact-checking organization. So to kick off, Kyle, could you just start us off with some really kind of introductory remarks on like what are we talking about when we talk about AI, generative AI, and so on?
Yeah, sure. I also want to just say, in terms of the context of elections and democracy, I worked on 5 UK election cycles, and I worked for Hillary for America in the 2016 US presidential. So I've been on the campaigning side of this also, just in terms of use cases. But to take a step back and say, what is this? In the simplest terms, artificial intelligence is when a computer is capable of doing stuff that intelligent beings like humans can do. So you can think of it like building an artificial brain because the processes performed by AI are inspired by how human brains work. So information goes in, the brain makes sense of it all, then spits out a response or an action. The two that you probably will have heard a lot are generative artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. And they sound so similar, which just makes it even more confusing. But generative artificial intelligence is the idea that the system can take a bunch of stuff it's given and generate totally new stuff from it. So you can say to it, paint a picture of a watermelon that is the president speaking to an audience of bananas in the style of Pablo Picasso. And it can literally paint that picture from that text information. Um, Artificial general intelligence is the sort of singularity, the idea that it is generally intelligent and operating completely independent of human input. So I think that's the easiest way to think about it. Where are we in the timeline? So we have generative artificial intelligence, and the estimates on when we'll have an artificial general intelligence, so an AI that can, kill us all, as people are talking about in the news and so forth, it ranges anywhere from 3 years to 50 years, which is a lot of uncertainty around how soon it will end us. But in this next year, really the thing to focus on in the context of elections is generative artificial intelligence. So when it generates new stuff.
Thanks, Kyle. I've turned my video off just because the internet is a bit shaky, hence. So yeah, sorry about that, guys. So Hannah, your work is all about helping organizations to kind of use this technology to campaign better, campaign more effectively. Can you tell us a bit about some of the kind of typical use cases that a campaigner might find this kind of technology useful?
Yeah, so we've run sort of, I think, nearly kind of 12 or 15 workshops with different campaigning networks, campaigners, campaign groups across the world, thinking about how they can kind of harness this technology very immediately in their kind of day to day. And I think the biggest gain at the moment that we're seeing is it's really helping to speed up workflows. So we're seeing rather than sort of automating whole chunks of things, instead it's quite useful to use these tools in combination with a kind of a human. So it avoids you starting with kind of a blank page when you're thinking about things. You can prompt it, you can successively prompt it, We see most success comes from when you don't just use the model's first output, but you then kind of tweak it and you iterate, which obviously involves a really good combination of kind of human input and then machine input. So we're finding that's the most productive way that people are using it at the moment. Obviously, the main sort of area that people are using it in is sort of content generation. So kind of like, help me come up with a slogan for this campaign, or help me come up with a tweet, or help me write a leaflet, or help me come up with a paragraph about this. But one of the things that we make sure to focus on when we are training people is trying to spot where kind of a AI model might be kind of bending the truth a little bit. So we use a really good example where we say, we put in 2 pieces of facts, which are kind of Joe Bloggs has done this many pieces of casework and won this campaign. And we said, make this sound really exciting for a leaflet. And then we go back and look at what it's done, and it's gradually just kind of exaggerated the truth slightly in order to fulfill the function of make it sound exciting. So it starts to insert things like the campaign is hard fought, the campaign is, will make cycling safe. And it's kind of inserting details, which is kind of misleading, basically. So what we do is we make sure that when we kind of look at that training, we say, look, always check everything that comes out of these models. Make sure that you're being responsible about that you're responsible for the output. The AI is not responsible for the output. You as a human are responsible for the output. So if you are lying or misleading people, that is on you. So we're quite particular about that. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. Again, with ChatGPT Plus, there's many things that can be done. You can do things like upload a picture of a leaflet and say, analyze this and tell me how to improve it. You can use the data science function to upload some, say, Twitter data and be like, tell me what you know about my best performing tweets. Give me some insights, and it will kind of crunch that data for you. So I think there is like a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of ways that this can kind of immediately be applied. I think we're not quite at the stage where independent kind of tools or functions can be built yet. But I think that we sort of will be on our way there. And again, Campaign Lab is kind of experimenting with building some interesting tools using AI, using it to kind of parse big data sets, using it to analyze big data sets, particularly in terms of language. And I think like there are really big opportunities. I mean, the mayor of New York is currently using AI to speak to constituents in different languages with his voice. He's taking a clip of his voice, he's using AI to then translate what he's saying into like 5 different languages so he can speak to people directly in the language that they best understand. So there are lots of kind of opportunities for campaigners to like really democratize and use these tools in ways that are really helpful for people. But then I would also say there's a lot of worry about how these could be used badly. Just a quick note on sort of targeting, because that kind of is coming up quite a lot. So it's quite good at being able to help you understand how to frame messages in different ways, using different tones, using different messengers. Practically, it's quite good at that. However, I think it was Oxford University who did some research where they tested kind of AI generated targeted messages against just normal AI generated messages that weren't targeted specifically, and they performed the same. So I don't think we've quite seen the sort of people haven't quite cracked the, I'm targeting people based on their psychology and AI is like automatically generating it all. I don't think it's quite got to there yet. I mean, again, with more fine-tuned models, it may get there, and with the right prompting, it may get there. But at the moment, we're not seeing loads of that. And yeah, I guess also the other opportunity for campaigners is I found particularly around images. So images cause like a lot of controversy, but I also think images have been really useful for campaigns where you're trying to portray the experiences of people who might be particularly vulnerable or like who won't want their photographs used in your campaign. So having the option to generate AI images and then being really clear and transparent about the fact that you're using AI to generate these images up front means you can start to tell stories of people that maybe haven't been told before. So yeah, that's a kind of rough tour of what's possible at the moment, but very happy to go into any of that more.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, that was really helpful. So lots there about the opportunities. Azura, coming to you now. What about the threats? What kind of what are the risks that these technologies pose in terms of things like misinformation and declining trust in politics?
Thanks, Grace. And I'm actually quite pleased to follow Hannah on this, because I think There's a bit of a doom and gloom surrounding AI. It's dangerous, it's worrying, it's going to corrupt our whole election. And actually, Hannah, you raised some really interesting points that there's a lot of ways that this tool can be used to help harness election, help harness campaigns, reach wider audiences. So that's really exciting to hear. I'm going to come back to a slightly more worrying point that actually the problem with AI and the way it's currently being used by political parties is there is no regulation in place and there are no guidance in place for how parties should be using AI in an election. So as Kyle said, we're in a brilliant year. There's loads of elections happening, particularly here in the UK. We know we're going to see an election within the next year, but there is no current guidance on how parties plan to use that within their campaigns. And I want to flag one example with you all that I think is a really good example of what we should be worried about. Many of you might have seen this video, but back in October last year, a deep fake came out. It was a video about Keir Starmer. And if you've seen it, you'll understand exactly what I mean when I say it's a very convincing video that supposedly shows Keir Starmer shouting at his staff. Now, the troops rallied, all the MPs came to go around and said, we're not going to share this, it's really bad. But that being said, within 24 hours, it gained over 1.5 million views on Twitter. That's an enormous amount. And that's an enormous amount for something that didn't actually happen, that is misleading. And what I think is really worrying about that video, and is really sort of a really good example of what might come, is there was nothing that said to those MPs, hey, you have to stand up and say, this is wrong. In that moment, they all chose to come together and go, no, I'm not going to promote this anymore. This isn't real. But is that something that might happen going forward? When we start to get into that election cycle where things get a bit touchy and things start to get, as campaigns do, you're trying to win your vote, you're trying to win your seats. Can we be ensured that MPs are going to really use AI in a responsible way? So something we're looking at Full Fact and working with other partners such as Demos, other civil society organizations, is really encouraging, the major parties to put forward a pledge on how they're going to use AI within the election. Really, and that boils down to 2 words. We want to see AI used both responsibly and we want to see AI used transparently. Let me explain a little bit about that, and I'm sure we can get into that more today. But I think that starts with labeling content that has been made using Gen AI. So we can know if you have used Gen AI for something that's really exciting, as Hannah says, maybe a translation, maybe an image, something that's really allowing you to spread your message, we need to know that that has been made by Gen AI. And you need to say, we promise to do that with all of our campaigns going forward. We also want to see you call out Gen AI when it isn't appropriate. So we don't want to see you amplify false claims, as has been a really good example with the Keir Starmer deepfake video, to not amplify false and misleading claims. And then most importantly, to publish your internal party guidance on how you are going to use Gen AI, so that organizations like Full Fact, organizations that are probably present today, can scrutinize those points and they can say, listen, this isn't strong enough, this needs to be improved more. So those are just a few ways that I think we can explore how we can use Gen AI responsibly and transparently. And Hannah's right, there's some brilliant ways that it can be used, but unregulated, without any rules in place, without any promises in place, it's quite risky and really damaging to the election. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now, but I'm sure we've got lots we can talk about going forward.
Thanks, that's great. And yeah, definitely we'll be coming on to regulation later on in the call. Hannah and Kyle, would either of you like to add anything to that on this sort of questions of misinformation and the impact of like trust in politics is already sort of on the way down? How does AI come into the picture, and how do you feel about that? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in.
I'll go after you. Go.
On that. So again, like, I think some of the points raised are really important. Again, when we do our trainings, one of the first things that we say is, like, you need to write down a policy, like, even just to protect your own organization. So to help protect your staff members, if you're working with volunteers, to help protect them as well, just have a really clear guidelines about, okay, what do you do and what don't you do, and things like we talk about things like keeping a human in the loop, so making sure that a human checks any content that comes out of these models, things like having transparency, so being really clear about declaring when you're using AI and why, and then also some basic things around data protection, so like making sure that you do not upload people's personal information into a model which could ideally kind of learn from that. So we have some template policies actually on our website if anybody is interested in making sure they've got those. And just that wider point about trust in politics. So I do agree that like this does add a new dimension to trust collapsing in politics, but I would also say that trust has been on the wane in politics for a very long time. And in many ways, like the solution to a lot of this stuff is actually proper relational campaigning at a grassroots level, where you say to people, I'm going to deliver, you know, this, and this, and they can see with their own eyes that those things have been delivered. As I say, you cannot fake a clean park. If you said you're going to clean up the park and locally you clean up the park, people are more likely to be inclined to trust what you say. So I do think there is this deeper issue of trust that politics really has to grapple with. And although these factors and AI kind of exacerbates that problem, this is a deeper problem we were already having to deal with. Like people already don't trust politicians. So I think that should definitely be the thing that we're focusing on. And that comes from actions, and it comes from fulfilling promises, and it comes from building up trust in messengers, as well as some of the things that we've also talked about. So I don't want to kind of miss that bit. Like good campaigning and good government and good delivery will also help a lot of these problems.
Yeah, so I'm probably on the far end of doom and gloom. For me, AI poses an existential threat to democracy and elections. And the reason is if you look just at social media, right? So 2016, Donald Trump became president. We had the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which I worked on in context. We had 4 years to do something about just social media. The US did nothing. The UK has done almost nothing. The EU is doing kind of something. And now we have elections in 50 countries. These social media companies have pared back their election safeguarding teams to even less people than they were ahead of the 2020, for example, US presidential election, which led to, of course, an insurrection. So we're already in this landscape where people kind of don't know what they can believe, and there's total uncertainty in the internet space. And now we're adding a tool to that can make anything you ask it to make, whether it's real or not. So we're looking at a situation where a lay voter will have no idea anymore whether anything they're looking at is true or not, or real or not. And oftentimes people think about these tools being used to convince people of something. But I think it's important to remember that a broader overarching objective is to just get people to not trust anything, to distrust the whole system. And so when you have a super information superhighway like social media combined with a tool that anyone can access and create anything in a heartbeat with no regulation or oversight, for me that's just the perfect match for absolute chaos. So I say that because I think it's really important to not forget the worst possible thing that could happen, because ahead of 2020 we said months before social media could be used for an insurrection, and people genuinely laughed at a lot of civil society organizations. And then 4 months later, we had an insurrection. So we have to be bullish now.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Kyle. Yeah, I'm enjoying that we have a range of perspectives here. And I think that point about the sort of the fact that I think we're already at a time where we can't know whether what we see online is real or not. I think that's something that people have been saying, oh, in a few years' time that will be the case, but I think we're actually sort of already there in some ways. So in terms of, we think we should get on to regulation before we open it out to questions. So Atzura, you alluded to the role of political parties in terms of the way they campaign responsibly and transparently, and the conduct of public figures in this. And Hannah, that was also an important part of the Keir Starmer deepfake, that all the cross-party denouncement of that was really important in debunking it. What is the kind of regulation landscape more formally looking like right now? Are there any sort of promising signs coming out of any governments across the world, or is this sort of still way behind the where it needs to be to sort of control misinformation for the elections of 2024. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one, or what luck.
I can start briefly on a sort of on an overarching point. And I think, I imagine this is something we'll all agree on, is there's not nearly enough regulation, but there's not nearly enough understanding of the problem at play. I think some of the things we're looking at full fact with this pledge is actually to substitute regulation ahead of an election, because it's very unlikely we're going to see any regulation before an election comes in play. And I think that's really worrying. And I think until you have a lot of regulation put in place on how we can actually control this in a way that's mannered, in a way that's really going to tackle the root of the problem, we're not going to see any issues. And we are going to constantly see examples like the Keir Starmer deepfake, or sort of a wider spread of misinformation that's going to have ad hoc ways in which to kind of remedy and stop the spread of misinformation any further. But certainly, Hannah and Kyle, I'm sure you have more thoughts on this too, from a global perspective.
Yeah, so I don't know too much about regulation, but I have attended a few different events where we've been like discussing types of regulation. I think really kind of focusing in on things like the UI of these tools and making sure that like what is built into that UI is an acknowledgement that what comes out of the model may not be correct or accurate, and also a shifting of responsibility to the person who puts out the thing that the model creates, and making that really clear, like you are legally responsible for what you share online and what you create. I also think it's quite interesting the extent to which like existing laws could be used to kind of like strengthen things. So currently, if you kind of spread things on Facebook that are hateful or horrible, whether they have been generated by AI or not, they are against content guidelines. So it may be that we can like beef up some existing things while they're working out the actual things that we need for this. Which I think is quite a good source of possible responses. I think also in the absence of any like formal regulation yet, I also think it's incredibly important that a lot of this will be sorted out in the doing, which is why I, as like kind of a progressive campaigner, I'm skilling up other progressive campaigners in how to use these tools. Because when a new technological change happens, you can't just wait for the government to regulate it. They were behind on social media, as you said, Kyle. Like they are only just getting to grips with the impact of social media on our society. So in the absence of that, you know, civil society has to get organized. The people who will be building our institutions, the people who will be, you know, campaigning, we need to kind of agree amongst ourselves how we are going to use this and why. If we leave it just to bad actors, or we refuse to engage with this technology, we are just going to be left behind. So I feel very strongly that you have to engage with something to shape it. And I think very much this technology will be shaped in how it is used. I also think there's a bigger point than just regulation, which is about like economic gains from these models. So currently, like they are built on collective knowledge. They are built on, you know, data sources that are open, that our society has built over years and years, and really thinking about how they deliver value for the collective is a really important thing that I think also needs to be looked at in any regulation, which is like economic distribution of the gains of this technology. But yeah, that's just some thoughts.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, I think
Kyle,
Hannah,
carry on. I was going to ask you if you could maybe also talk a bit about, because you alluded to earlier, the role of like tech firms and their sort of internal processes, and like how they're sort of cutting back on it's so internal regulations as well. But also say, what are you going to say in response to Hannah?
Oh yeah, no. So I was going to echo Hannah's last point around the fact that we have to remember these again are all private businesses, and their primary objective is to make as much money as possible. And they're almost all the exact same companies that have built all the social media and search platforms that we all still know and use. And if we look at what they said versus what they did with social media, we take down hate speech, we act on this, we act on that. We know from lots of internal documents that leaked that none of that was true, and they weren't really acting on anything. So we really can't assume in good faith that they're going to do anything that's in the best interest of society. They're going to do what's in the best interest of their bottom line. In terms of the global regulatory landscape, the EU is again leading, though there's a huge problem because the US government is lobbying the EU hard to exclude generative AI tools like ChatGPT from the regulation, which is sort of like, what's the point of the regulation? The UK's primary objective is to attract, current UK government's primary objective is to attract investment, which is why, for example, the AI Safety Summit, all the commitments were voluntary. What company is going to follow voluntary commitments? And again, the rate of change, which both of you already spoke to as well. We think social media moves fast compared to governments. AI is exponentially faster. So this is sort of a crisis state. I think we find ourselves in ahead of elections, just in terms of within the companies. OpenAI doesn't really have an election integrity team at all. I pulled a quote from a great article in Time by Billy Perigo that was published yesterday from Sam Altman, who said, "We have a new ability to do mass-scale direct democracy that we've never had before. AI can just chat with everybody and get their actual preferences." By we, he means his company. So again, here we are looking at democracy, our precious institution, and we're saying, great, cool, this guy thinks his company should be the one driving these direct conversations to find out people's preferences. And if you have an interest in driving people's preferences towards being favorable towards you, why wouldn't you? So again, I think we just have to look at recent history and say, do not trust these companies at all. Force them to do stuff.
Great, thank you, Kyle. Before we open it out to the Q&A from the audience, I think Tom wanted to jump in with a question for the panel as well.
Thank you very much, Grace, and thank you to our panelists today. Azura and Kyle, I think, have painted, and indeed Hannah, have painted a picture where basically AI in the run-up to the general election is going to be almost a free-for-all, because there isn't any regulation and the social media companies are not going to either want to, or even if they wanted to, have the time to do anything about it. So in concrete terms, Azura, you set out a little bit about what the political parties could do on a voluntary basis before the general election. Is there anything more that Kyle or Hannah could add to that? And of course, what can we as citizens do before the general election to try to minimize the impact of disinformation and misinformation?
That's a big question. I think, again, what I'm trying to do is people, I guess, who I believe have good aims, I'm trying to empower with the knowledge of how to use this, how to spot this, and how to use it responsibly. So again, like the more that we model the change that we want everybody else to model, the more civil society groups put transparency declarations, the more we have public policies on every organization's website, the more we can shape like the kind of environment and the sort of norms that we are willing to accept around this technology. So I think like one of the big things like civil society groups can do is model good behavior, which is have a policy, declare transparently when you're using things, have a clear guidance for your staff members, and don't be afraid of using this technology either, because if we don't if we don't engage with it, again, we don't get to shape it. And so much of this will be in the doing. It's very interesting, actually, because lots of these big companies have created these models that are super general purpose. And actually, they're desperate for use cases. They want to know how this can concretely add value to like companies and businesses. So actually, the kind of power of this technology is really worked out in the doing and how people are using it. And on that, civil society, we can do that as much as companies can do that. We have use cases. We have like reasons to use this. We can build our own tools. It was one of those famous quotes where it's like, capitalism built the shop, so we built the co-op. Like just because one thing has been built one way doesn't mean that we can't have an alternative. And yes, it is quite bleak sometimes, but that's not to say we just don't give up on the whole thing or don't give up on the ability to shape it. But yeah, so I think practice, doing helps in this. I'm sure Kyle's got some other ideas too.
Yeah. No, I think we need to just start from the place of assuming these companies aren't going to do anything unless they're forced to, and think of what we've been working on with some democracy organizations in different parts of the world. If we had one ask of these companies, what would it be? And we're sort of coalescing around the idea that, and when I say these companies, I mean this combination between social media and AI, because I agree with Hannah and Azura, like there are great positive use cases. The place where AI starts to become really dangerous is when we combine it with social media and that mass delivery of information very quickly, is to ask these companies to human moderate all content, organic or paid, that is published by political campaigners and high profile political activists, right? So that means that an actual human is going to look at whatever they post, and that could be, they could then deem it false information. They could then deem it created by AI, etc. But at the very least, it forces the company to be held responsible for what the most dangerous people on these platforms post and spread. So that, to me, is the one thing, if we were just to get one thing from these companies for this year, because there are 4 billion people voting this year around the world.
Tom, if I can just jump in as well, I think something we should also mention, and I'm definitely on the less pessimistic side of this argument, is that politicians are also really concerned themselves about how AI is going to impact the election. They're obviously going to use AI themselves, but they're worried about how it will impact them, their campaigns, and ultimately the results of the election. So I think something that's probably important for everyone to take away from this is about also a personal sense of responsibility of educating yourself of the material that's out there, not spreading misinformation, not amplifying it further, because you might look at a video or a text and go, oh, it's really funny, share it, but someone else might not have that critical thinking to dissect the video, to dissect the image and say, oh, this is obviously fake. So I think something I would certainly encourage, voters going out to the polls, reading information, receiving things on social media, is to ensure that they're being critical of where things are coming from and they're being skeptical about the information they received and really analysing, is this true? Is this in line with what's being put out? And lots of brilliant organisations, Full Fact included, are kind of giving guides on how to spot deepfakes, how to spot misinformation. And I think it's really important to amplify yourself with those tools so that you can spot that as well and go into an election, educated in the best way possible.
Great, thanks. So some questions now from the audience. This first one is from Jeremy. So he asks, do you think the result of uncertainty created by the introduction of AI will drive more people towards credible sources? You can interpret that as you wish. Kyle, do you want to just go first on that one, if you want to?
Yeah, so part of the research I'm doing right now is actually about this, like where people get their information and if they move, if they feel uncertain. And the short answer to the question is no, they don't, because social media remains the primary place where they seek information. And actually, Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, made a decision very recently to no longer operate reputable news sources. So it's even harder to get news from reputable sources on social media. I think the main thing that people do is either seek out information that reaffirms what they already believe, or completely just give up and say, it's too hard. This is all too complicated and difficult for me to find anything real. And that's combined with, of course, a huge campaign to delegitimize very reputable sources of news as being biased and untrustworthy, when in fact, relative to what else is out there, they're incredible.
Thanks. Hannah or Azura, would you like to add to that talk?
Nothing to add. I think Carl's research sounds really interesting, and please do share it with everyone once it's done. I'd love to read it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with lots of what Carl said. I think the only two things that I'd add is, again, like this is something that we as campaigners are thinking a lot about, which is like, okay, if people can't trust all the information that is happening online, things like social relationships become really important. Relational campaigning becomes really important. Knocking on someone's door and having a conversation with them as your local representative becomes really important. Delivering becomes really important. Like, actually, we might see like a return to some older forms of campaigning, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, actually. I think the other thing that gives me hope in terms of reputable sources is things like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a massive democratically created online fact checker, which like millions of people all over the world invest in, and we built this. And what's amazing is like if we can increase the number of people like relying on things like Wikipedia, I think that could really help. I mean, one thing that was really amazing was I think TikTok, when you search certain topics, refers you to the Wikipedia article. It actually comes in because lots of people are using TikTok to get their news now. So if you're like searching about a particularly contentious issue, instead of just showing you videos at the top, the first result is a link to the Wikipedia page, which covers the factual information around that conflict or that issue. So I do think like we do have some resources, tools, and things that we've built to try and solve this problem. It's just about us like finding them and promoting them and linking up with them. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Wikipedia, and I think we should use it more.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Another question from the audience. So this one is from Marisha. She asks, can you tell us about AI generated polls and polling and whether these are as or more successful than normal polls? And I guess I could also refer to AI focus groups as well. Hannah, I feel like this might be in your area as well.
Yeah, so lots of people have been doing lots of experiments on this. There is a really good Medium article, which you can find online, where somebody simulated the focus groups around the junior doctor strikes and then compared the output from the simulated focus group to polling on the issue to see if they got to the right point. I do think this is very interesting. There are a lot of people trying to do this kind of modeling and improve polling using AI kind of augmented segments and things. And I do think like it is possible. I think you can even do this yourself. Like if you're doing ChatGPT, you can be like, take on these 2 different personas using personas you've got from other research and have a discussion about this issue and see what comes out. I think we've got to be really careful though, not to make assumptions about people using these kind of tools. Like fundamentally, you are using stereotypes, biases, like, you know, proxies. It's very much removed from human people. So I think like you have to go into things like AI driven polling and focus groups with a very like large dose of skepticism. And I think also we want to like avoid sort of treating people as like numbers or segments. I mean, I would always say that as a campaigner. I think some campaigning gets really misled when we over rely on polling or segmentation rather than kind of building trust, which again, I'm going to come back to. We've not built trust enough. So when you're trying to solve that kind of problem, I think that those kind of technologies can always help. That's not to say there isn't some innovation going on there. I don't know how far it's got. It's an ongoing, open, innovating question. But yeah, if you're interested, there is an article about that simulated focus groups that you could check out.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Would anyone else like to jump in on that or move on to the next one? Nope. Okay, cool, we'll move on. So some questions about the inputs, the data that these AI models are being trained on. So there are 2 questions which sort of overlap. So how does an AI platform know whether the data it's using to create the output is valid, accurate, and safe? Who checks the data? That's from Dave. And then Tom, not our Tom, but another Tom says, are there legal or ethical issues about uploading data to generative AI for which you don't own copyright? So both questions about inputs. Kyle, maybe that would be a good one for you.
I mean, I can't speak as much to the when you're uploading it yourself, but maybe Hannah and Razura. But just on the first point around what's in it, like nobody's really checking it is the answer. OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, when it makes stuff up, OpenAI calls it a hallucination rather than a lie or an error. Which I think is an interesting way to frame it, sort of takes the seriousness of it out. And of course, the second piece, just the broader copyright issues. So what is OpenAI training its model on? A lot of that material is copyrighted for which it has not paid. So it's using the collective knowledge of humanity and turning it into something that they're making money from, which I think is upsetting and a very easy, straightforward thing that could be forced on them to fix. And I had one other thing, but I can't remember. So
Hannah, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, just on the uploading thing. So yeah, currently this is why I was talking about things like user interfaces being important, because currently if you upload some data, there is no I check that I have, I'm not putting personal information into this model. I check that I am uploading accurate information. There's none of that. Like, again, if we think about the user interface, which is what you see as a user when you're interacting with the tools, just thinking through some like changes to those, I think could actually be very powerful in terms of getting people to think about what they are uploading and why. I would always say never, ever, ever upload any personal information into these models. That is against data protection, not a good thing. Again, if you've got any data protection officers in the room, which there may be, I've spent some time with them recently. They are very important. There will be very strong like guidance about what you do with like individuals' data, and this guidance needs to be updated in light of you using generative AI models. And I think also just that idea of copyright. So again, if these models were using news sources and then fairly compensating the news industry for this, we could actually have a really amazing way to fund news. But that's not what's happening. As Kyle said, like these are private companies making money off open information, and not thinking about like who is actually profiting from the value that's being created. There is a very interesting example where many artists who are anti-AI art created a really interesting thing called Nightshade, which is where they infected their artwork online with this special tag, which basically made it unreadable to models, which meant that like they kind of broke the models when they absorbed this content, which is a very interesting example of people fighting back. So yeah, lots of copyright issues, and I don't quite know where it'll go, but it's very interesting.
That is interesting. I didn't know that's a really interesting example.
I was just gonna say I remember the last thing. Also, just to always remember that these tools are only as smart as the data that's been put into them. And they are when they're learning from data that is representative of the world we live in, they then repeat those same potential harms. So, for example, race bias is a huge one. One of the examples I talked about in my book is around hiring and companies using AI and facial recognition and names to determine who they should interview. And you would be unsurprised to learn that I think it was 90% of the time it favored white faces and historically European or white names. So biases will exist in these systems because biases exist in our world. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely something we haven't talked about yet. Here's a question I think that Atzura would be good for you to answer. So Lewis asks, what scope is there in using AI to help in combating the flow of mis and disinformation? So using AI itself to solve this problem.
Lewis, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to give Full Fact a bit of self-promotion. But Full Fact actually has developed an AI tool that we use within our fact-checking. So for those who aren't aware of the work that Full Fact does, we are primarily a fact-checking organization. We fact-check politicians and sort of verify their claims alongside pre-existing data and data that we can scope ourselves. And we've developed this AI tool to help with this fact-checking, but it's also being used around the world globally within many elections. Within Senegal, within a couple of countries in the Middle East. I think it's got about 15 countries at the moment, but I'd need to fact check that, to be honest with you. And I think what this tool is able to do, and I think where we can really push AI to help going forward, is it's to help pinpoint misleading claims so that journalists, so that fact checkers, so that people who are there to kind of put out good information can come back and give the right information and can give the correct information. So I think there's definitely a lot to be said about the fact that AI can further misinformation, but I think we can't underestimate the ability that it has as a tool to pinpoint where there is misleading claims and where there are, factual inaccuracies that need to be corrected. So for us at Full Fact, that's something we're using every day. We're using it to our advantage to help with our fact checking. And I think we'd be really interested in a wider call of how others can use that too, how politicians, how journalists, and really find ways to use the tool safely, ethically, transparently to work in the fight against misinformation.
Yeah, I just want to echo. I think you make such a good point around like we can we should be able to decide how we want these tools to steer, right? If they can be disinformation machines, then they can be good information machines because the architecture is there, right? And again, it's just sort of saying that perhaps as a private company, you have other responsibilities beyond simply making money because, like news, has long been established as holding a role outside of government and industry. These tools also have that similar duty. I saw a question about their environmental impact. There are coal power plants that are being kept open in parts of the world to power their server farms, right? So instead of saying, how do we use this tool to figure out the climate change crisis, right? Like, what can this tool analyze in a way that humans can't simply because of its computational ability to help us figure this out? But instead, we're keeping coal powered plants open so that a tool can make the Pope wear a giant puffer jacket, you know? That was the biggest meme that went huge first from one of the tools, which is like
Great, thank you, Kyle. So a question from Vicky here. Any thoughts on what can be done if or when companies and organizations publicly agree to a responsible AI policy, but then they don't actually follow these principles? Can anything be done? If so, what? Anyone could jump in on that, I think.
Maybe if I was to talk about it from political parties, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about what we can do with political parties around the election campaign to use AI responsibly. And that also has to lead to another question of, say they pledge this, then what do we do? And I think on a political front, it's about voting where your mouth is. It's about saying, we're not satisfied with that. I mean, our elected representatives have an obligation to serve our best interests. And we as the general public then have an obligation to tell them what we want and how we feel about certain things. I mean, it's something we're thinking about even more generally around the election cycle at Full Fact, as we're talking to the political parties and saying, we want you to campaign transparently. We want you to not use misleading claims in your advertisements. We want you to not use deceptive tactics that are really to mislead people. And we're saying, you know, if those things aren't adhered to, the general public will be angry and they will vote accordingly. So there's certainly questions to ask about sanctions, about, you know, fines for tech companies, but on a fundamental level with politics and with campaigns around the election cycle, it's about, you know, pleasing voters who want a certain thing and who are calling for a certain thing. But certainly I'm sure the other two will have much clearer answers on what can our tech companies be sanctioned with.
So I guess like just to jump in there. So one of the really terrifying things is particularly with things like labeling, where you're labeling or watermarking AI generated content. It's incredibly hard to do. And also just as you crack doing it or detecting it, there are ways to like undo it or evade it. So what you're seeing is like a constant war between the people who want to watermark or, you know, check versus the people who are avoiding the checks. So it's very hard to like have a definitive answer sometimes on whether something is AI generated or not. But I think again, as you've said, like it comes back to trust and voting with your feet. So why, if we think that the main political problem in this country is that nobody trusts politicians, and if politicians are thinking about that problem, which they should be, lying to people and irresponsibly using AI is probably not going to help you solve that problem. So I would hope that with that incentive in place, you know, people would see that that is wrong. And it might be that there are a few whistleblowers, there might have to be like some problems before people get the message. But yeah, as the public, there'll need to be some public accountability. And the great thing is now with, and again, this is why things like social media have positives and negatives, but actually social media is really good at holding people to account. Like one of the amazing things, you look at the hashtag Me Too movement, you look at many other things, like it is a way to be able to like declare and call out when something has gone wrong. So I think, yeah, we need to think about ways that, yeah, that can be held publicly accountable. But it does come back to that trust issue. Kyle, you might have more thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree with what both of you said. I think for me, it's reminding ourselves that governments are supreme and governments represent voters, not corporations. So the idea that we're getting companies to agree to something, I don't get to like agree to the law. Right? I don't get to agree that I'm not going to murder somebody, right? I just can't murder somebody. So when we look at corporations, I think we have to stop thinking what will they agree to, and instead governments need to say this is what you must deliver, which is what used to happen with government regulation. But instead now, particularly with tech companies, we see it time and again. Even the White House. Oh, we had the tech companies in, and we got them to agree to these 7 voluntary things. Got them to agree. You're the government. Tell them what they have to do. But there's this, particularly with tech, there's this real dynamic between tech and government that is much fuzzier than when we look at medicine safety, food safety, health, other areas. The former vice president of Starbucks said once, in the context of the harms caused by social media, if one coffee sold by Starbucks killed someone, all Starbucks would have to close until they figured out how to make sure coffee didn't kill anyone. Right? We've seen genocides facilitated on social media. We've seen violence, self-harm, all the rest of it. And we're starting to already see the same thing in AI. And yet they just chug along and we're like, let us know if something might go wrong. It's about governments really being firmer and remembering who they represent, people, not companies.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So we're coming towards the end now. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed getting the full range from optimism to extreme pessimism, and I'm still unsure where on that scale that I'm going to land. But I guess as a final question to everyone, we're going into this big year of elections. A lot of this technology, by its nature, it's very difficult to make predictions because of the way it develops so quickly and in such unpredictable ways. But so if you have to make some sort of prediction about how you're feeling about this year of elections, what kind of things that we should be looking out for, how hopeful overall you're feeling about it, what would you say to that? We'll start with Azura.
It's a huge question.
I was going to say, should I go first? Because I feel like you two are going to be much more positive than me. So
yes, let's do that,
Kyle. Oh, yeah, maybe we should do that. Yeah, Kyle first, and
then. I mean, I'm unfortunately very pessimistic. I'm less pessimistic in the UK. I actually think, relatively speaking, it will be somewhere in the middle in terms of impact. But on a global level, I think all 3 scenarios with regard to Donald Trump end very badly with violence. And I'm hoping that it doesn't take something extreme for lessons to be learned and action to be taken. I feel like there are enough lessons already for these governments and elected officials to act. But I am threat level midnight. I mean, I am so concerned that I literally think about it at night. Yeah. I'll stop there.
Okay. Azura, then over to you.
Oh wow, Kyle, that's really worrying. I'll only speak for the UK because certainly in full fact that's where our expertise and my expertise is. And I'm not as optimistic. I think with this election, there's a lot of build up to it. It's not been a snap election. We've had a lot of time to talk and wait. And to be honest with you, I think people are sort of looking at their watches going, anytime now, right? I think there are certainly some concerns about how AI can be used in this election. We talked about some of the concerns. We talked about the deep fake. I think as long as the public are vigilant, as long as people are watching out for it, and I think as long as we keep calling on our politicians to act in a way that's ethically and transparently and really tell them that this is something that's important to us and we care about this, I'm not so concerned. And I think we have a lot of power in this country still to make minor changes, to make substantial changes, and to really, to change governments if that is something we wish to do. So not completely optimistic, not completely sort of keeping myself up at night worried, just really empowered by the idea that we can still have a say on what we want to see and how we want our elected officials to act.
Thank you. And Hannah, over to you.
Okay, I guess I'm going to try and be super optimistic, even though I do actually share a lot of the worries that Kyle has voiced. I I do think that this is a massive change. I actually don't think all the implications of this technology will hit this year, actually. I think that some of the implications will hit this year, but I think actually the really deeper structural, transformative like changes to our economy, society, much more beyond that, you know, we're looking at probably a few years. I suppose what makes me hopeful is the fact that fundamentally, yeah, we have some agency in this change. Like, I truly believe that I wouldn't literally spend all my hours teaching people about AI and how to use it, or teaching like the people that I believe in who want to do good in the world about using AI and how to use it, if I didn't believe that we had some agency to kind of guide how this goes. I think also, like, I'm quite optimistic in this country. I hope that there'll be a change of government. Again, like, I think the government that might come in will be more attentive to like how this is going to shape the society and economics of this change, and making sure that people feel secure and safe in the way that we then address this change in our society, because it is going to be a few years of turbulence, I think, both in our economy and more broadly. So yeah, I'm optimistic about this year, and I am optimistic ultimately overall, because I strongly believe that, you know, technology comes and then we shape it and then we change it, and there are more of us than there are of companies. So yeah, I'm optimistic. We just need to get organized.
Great, thank you everyone. Those really, really great answers. And yeah, I think that one thing that I keep thinking about is what you said, Hannah, is if we don't engage with it, we don't get to shape it. And I think we can definitely all agree that this is not going away. So at least we're all here and we're all thinking about it, and have to see what the next year brings. Tom, did you want to say anything before we close? We've got a minute left, or are you?
No, other than to say thank you to all the attendees, and apologies to people whose questions weren't asked. And there will be a recording of this that will be put online soon for people to be able to catch up with. So thank you again, and thank you, Grace, for excellent leading on this event. See you soon.
Thanks everyone, and yeah, sorry that we couldn't
Thank
get to
you.
and yeah, thanks to our
Thank
brilliant
you.
panel for your words of wisdom today, and everyone have a nice afternoon.
Bye.